Hey guys, Halfway here with a very juicy and recent topic. So when I was scrolling on Twitter this morning, I found out that apparently Psyonix accidentally leaked that Rocket League is coming to Unreal Engine 5. They then removed this, but subsequently admitted on Reddit that this is the plan for the future. So I wanted to make this video to explain what Unreal Engine 5 could mean for Rocket League, what the challenges are for the devs, and at the end a small wish list of features that I think are best integrated now while the project is far from being done. So I'm just gonna do this freestyle and then edit it down. I just got my list of notes here and I'm gonna go through them one by one. So the first reason to swap to Unreal Engine 5 might be better performance. But why would Unreal Engine 5 give us better performance? So there are a couple of reasons. First of all, Rocket League is currently built on Unreal Script, which is a scripting language for Unreal Engine 3. Scripting languages tend to be slower in programming. I'm not going to go into the details of why that happens, and there's certainly a lot of room for optimization whether you're using a scripting language or not, but in general they are slower. Due to the speed limitation, Rocket League already has a lot of native machine code that doesn't use the scripting language in order to ensure that the performance is good at the critical moments. However, if you don't use a scripting language at all, you might be able to squeeze out a little bit more performance. So the reason I think this will be going away is because the Unreal script language is not supported in Unreal Engine 4 or 5. Instead, the new Unreal engines go fully in on a blueprint visual scripting system, which actually gets compiled down to machine code before it gets run in the actual game. Now, this is still not necessarily as efficient as if you have a real C++ programmer, look at the code and think of how can I make this the most performant possible, but it should be closer. The lack of Unreal script in these new Unreal engines is also the reason why the conversion process to a new engine will take very long and a lot of effort. There are also some other reasons why the Unreal Engine 5 may improve performance significantly. The most obvious way in which performance improvements could happen is that the Unreal Engine is just a modern engine that was built from the ground up for modern hardware that we have nowadays. Now that is significantly different from the Unreal Engine, which actually came out in 2006. Of course, Psyonix has already done many things to make Rocket League multi-threaded to a certain degree, but the low-level things of the engine are sometimes not possible to swap out easily. Another thing that's a bit of an unnecessary performance issue in Rocket League is the user interface. Now it's based on an old technology, Scaleform graphics, which has been discontinued in 2018, and it's based on Adobe Flash. So that system no longer exists in the newer Unreal engines, so we can expect that the new user interface will be built on something new, hopefully more efficient. But right now it's not all that great, even though not all of it is related to the fact that this system was used. I'm just gonna expect them to do a rewrite of the UI, and I hope that they use their experience to just make that one more efficient and less stuttery. Okay, that's how the performance might be affected. However, I don't actually expect them to do this switch for performance reasons at all. After all, Rocket League runs reasonably well at frame rates like 240 and 360 FPS on good computers and 60 FPS on even really weak computers. The more likely reason why the developers actually care about the change is because the Unreal Engine 5 is going to give them access to more modern tools and features that are integrated directly into the engine with support from Epic. This could result in better graphics and even new features that would otherwise have never happened. So what am I talking about here? It is always possible for the developers to extend the old engine. That's basically like building your own engine, but that's exactly also not the point of why they're using a pre-made engine like the Unreal Engine. They want the engine to be there for them as a tool to use and actually make the game. So things like game features, maps, cars, all the things we actually care about, rather than just working on low-level stuff that makes the game run in the first place. Although I have to interject that sometimes making stuff yourself perfectly fit for your own game actually makes the game better. First of all, the Unreal Engine 5 comes with a completely new lighting model compared to the Unreal Engine 3. Lighting is very important to the looks, so that means just importing the old maps and assets into the new engine could easily mean that the graphics look instantly better. Now, this might actually require a bit of extra performance, so even though the engine should be more performant, we might actually lose the performance again there or end up even with worse performance than we had before. I am obviously not hoping for that to happen because I very much care about high frame rates, but from a developer's point of view, it's always a tough act to balance, and I really hope that the settings allow you to go really low, so you do at least have the possibility of really good performance. Now, there are other graphical improvements which could be made quite easily in the new Unreal Engine. For example, ray tracing, which can be used to make reflections on cars happen or render improved shadow quality. Also, Rocket League doesn't have good anti-aliasing options, so with Unreal Engine 5 you can enable their TAA technology quite easily, and that provides much less flickering on the edges of objects. Now, one thing that should be mentioned here is that just switching to the new engine version doesn't mean that any of the assets would change. Now, the cars might not look better, and the maps might not look better. However, there is the possibility for them to use the new engine's capabilities to import more high-res detail models of the maps and cars, and maybe do that with the same performance or just sacrifice the performance at the higher end so you can have better graphics. All of this may require a lot more work, but sometimes artists create high-resolution models that they simply make less complex to put it in the game, and now with the new engine they might just be able to put the more complex version in there that they already have. Last but not least, there's also technologies like NVIDIA Reflex or DLSS or AMD Super Resolution. And all of these are quite easy to integrate into the new Unreal Engine versions because they usually already have plugins from NVIDIA or other developers that have made them. So as a dev, you often have less work to do there rather than integrating it manually into your own engine. Beyond just Psyonix, the new engines have better editors. They are open source, still supported, and they have add-ons and other systems to make modding easier. Now, we actually don't know if Psyonix cares about this or they're gonna make it easier to mod, because there's obviously still some other things that you need for modding rather than just the editor itself, but it is a possibility that if they ever cared about modding, that they thought we might as well do that on the new version when we have everything, rather than doing it on the old system. Well, now we get to the worst part of the engine change. The engine change is so massive that Buckers Mod and GIF Your Game will certainly be broken for quite a while. Now, there isn't even a guarantee that Buckers Mod will actually ever be fully integrated into the new version. It depends on how many changes there are, how difficult it is to port it to the new version, and things like that. And certain plugins might be broken forever. Now, with GIF Your Game, there's a company behind it, and I'm sure they will fix it one day. But since Psyonix doesn't give modders any information to work with, we really just gotta wait until the version comes out, and then we can see what happens. Okay, so how much work is this really for Psyonix to port to the new engine? Now, you may have seen somewhere that it is as easy as just importing it to the new version, but that is actually not true. That's only true for Unreal Engine 4 to Unreal Engine 5. Since they're going from Unreal Engine 3, which, as I said before, has the scripting language, they will actually need to rewrite a lot of code. Now, I saw Lethemy on Twitter say they have to rebuild everything from the ground up, but I'm not quite sure if you can say this with certainty. Now, the code of Rocket League is quite component-based, so you can usually just work one component at a time and translate that over into the new Blueprint scripting system or use C++. That is, of course, tons of work regardless, but if you have like a straight-up plan to work with, it's still a lot less work than if you try to just build the game from the ground up and maybe use like different design philosophies, maybe use some of the stuff you've learned from the previous version and just build something new. That would be a good idea to make something better in theory, but in practice this may take too long and be too high of a cost for the developers to consider this. However, as I said before, they still need to rewrite a lot of things from scratch. For example, the user interface, where I don't think it would make a lot of sense to port over the old scale form, which isn't even a supported program anymore. And beyond the things that have to be rewritten, they may choose to rewrite some things that they thought needed to be rewritten anyways, and now is really the best time to do that. This is where gameplay could actually be affected. Now, I've seen some people on Twitter and they are very worried about the physics changing. Rocket League does not actually use the integrated physics engine of the Unreal Engine. They use the bullet physics, which Cohen mentioned in a talk at the Game Developers Conference. They integrated that engine into Unreal Engine 3, so they can just do the same thing into Unreal Engine 5. And there should be no reason for why they can't match the old physics exactly. Maybe it's not going to be deterministically exactly the same, but it should be possible to have the same within any reasonable margin. However, maybe they shouldn't actually do that, which is what I'm going to talk about in the wishlist. Last but not least, there will be a lot of work involved with assets. You gotta update them maybe for the new engine, although it seems that with the DX11 update, Rocket League has already changed the shader model, and as far as I know, the new textures should actually work fine in the new engine, but there's probably still a lot of things to be done, and the new lighting system is going to require some tuning from artists and stuff like that, so you still get that Rocket League feel even though you have like a better lighting system around it. So definitely a massive project going on here, and I honestly didn't expect this was coming. A lot of people predicted this, but personally I wasn't sure they would actually be doing this because it is so much work. Okay, let's get to my wish list. Now, a lot of these I think people will agree with, some of them may be a bit more personal, but I thought now is the best time to give it to Psyonix while they still have time to maybe integrate some things, and maybe some in the studio will see this, and maybe they will consider some of these points if they haven't already. Okay. Let's get to the biggest one first. And this is gonna have a lot of controversy around it, I think. So, as I said, the physics engine, they could just blindly integrate that into the new Unreal Engine. Now, there is a limitation with the current Rocket League physics that they're using. And I don't think it's because of the bullet physics engine that they're using, but it's because of how these settings are set up. The way you do computer physics is usually in tiny time steps. In Rocket League's case, that means Rocket League makes a physics time step for every 8 milliseconds that happen. And between those physics steps, there is no simulation happening, which means that you could basically tunnel through an object if you get from one side to the other within 8 milliseconds and have some weird behaviors happen with things like that. Now, 8 milliseconds are already pretty short, so that prevents most of the tunneling, and it is why Rocket League feels really fine. They have also added some additional physics update in the past that has improved this behavior somewhat. However, if you hit the crossbar, for example, there are still some buggy bounces, and the reason is because Rocket League does not have continuous collision detection. Continuous collision detection is a bit of a trick where you try to do steps and steps and steps until you find the actual point of the collision rather than just the 8 millisecond steps of the collision. Now, if you do that, you could actually prevent pretty much all buggy bounces unless you have some mesh at the wrong position in Rocket League, but as far as I know, there exists none of that anymore. There was when Rocket League was launched in 2015, there was like broken meshes around the field, but all of those have been pretty much fixed. But the crossbar bounces are still not perfect because of the lack of continuous collision detection. Now, there's also the difference on car hits, where CCD could also improve the accuracy. Now, usually the player is still the limiting factor of how precise you are in a shot, and these tiny 8 millisecond deviations are not going to make a difference. But it's still nice that in a game which is as precise as Rocket League, you feel like you have the perfect hit. And if you ever miss, it's not because the physics engine did like that 8 millisecond step, which did not quite work out for you. Beyond this, continuous collision detections may also improve demos. Now, I'm not sure if it will fix more than like 30% of demos, because I feel like most cases are because of network latency, where it just appears broken on your screen, because we are playing a game together over the internet where there's always delays, so you never have quite the accurate, most up-to-date state, and that's all the reasons why it may look broken. And then I think 20% of the cases people are just being unreasonable, where if they were the ones trying to demo someone, they think, oh, this should be a demo, and then they don't get the demo. And in the same perspective, if they're the car getting demoed, they don't want to get demoed. So it's just bias pretty much. That's what I would say 20% of the cases are, and then maybe 30% of the cases could be fixed by continuous collision detection. Now, the obvious downside of continuous collision detection is that it requires more performance, because instead of just doing one collision detection every 8 milliseconds, you gotta check in between whether there might have been a collision happening, and then if you think there might have been a collision happening, you do a lot of sub-steps, so overall you could have to do as much as 16 times the amount of collision detections, which could definitely have an impact on performance on low-end machines. And there is no option to just do that on the high-end machines, because then you would have completely different games on both types of computers or consoles, and that doesn't work out at all in an online game. Now, if we add continuous collision detection, the physics would change. There are two reasons for that. First of all, just the fact that the collision was accurately determined is going to mean that on average the collision is going to be slightly different. Now, in some cases, the 8 millisecond step may already be exactly the step where the car just collided with the ball, so that hit would be the same. But it could be up to 8 milliseconds off compared to continuous collision detection. And this kind of difference can matter, because you might end up having to do some additional tuning. And that's really where the problem starts, because if you tune too much, then the physics are really going to feel different, rather than just a tiny bit of the hit. And I personally do think that a tiny bit of the hit is definitely worth it. If the devs find out we would have to tune the physics too much, I would say don't change them. However, I think a lot of people think that physics shouldn't change at all, and I can kind of understand their viewpoint. However, I don't think that a tiny change like that is gonna screw your muscle memory for too long, and in the end, this should provide a better experience over the years to come. And there's really no better time to do this than now, because when you port things over to a new engine, people are gonna think, oh, stuff feels differently already anyways, because for example, you might get better or worse performance on the new engine. Also, just seeing people comment on Twitter makes me aware that people are gonna expect some changes perhaps to happen. So I think they're gonna be less outraged than if you do a random patch and all of a sudden the physics feel different. If you turn this into like a Rocket League 2 or Rocket League Next situation, then people are going to be way more accepting of a small change, especially if that small change should be in the better direction in the long term. Now, while Psyonix is at it, looking at the physics, I think they need to look at the determinism. Now, determinism just tells you whether if you start out with the same result and then do the same action, you come out at the same result. Basically, Rocket League is deterministic with its physics. That is what I'm testing with my patch tester every single patch, and that does exactly the same action starting from exactly the same position. So if the car does not end up in the same spot at the end, the ball does not end up in the same spot at the end, I know something must have changed. And usually that doesn't happen. There's only been one real physics change since I've created that tool a couple of years ago. However, while I have tested it on Intel and AMD systems, at least 3 computers, I've never been able to test something like this on a console or the server. And I do have some reasons to believe that those are actually not exactly the same. And now usually this won't actually matter because you have like a tiny deviation and the server sends you updates 60 times a second. So with like low ping, that's deviation is going to be fixed within 100 milliseconds and there's nothing you actually noticed. But there are some cases where I am having no lag and either the statistics are incorrectly reporting that I have no lag, or there is a deviation between me and the server happening here that is only happening because the physics are not being calculated exactly the same on the server as they are on my machine. Now, there are lots of reasons of why this is difficult to make happen, but there are also games that are built around this determinism from the server to the client, and if this determinism was broken, the entire game wouldn't work anymore. Now, I'm just telling you this as an example that it is actually possible to make this happen in a game. And if you make this happen in a game, especially on low lag conditions, this is going to be reducing some edge cases where people experience some kind of desync from the server, which feels like lag. However, it's not really lag because it didn't actually have anything to do with the internet connection. Okay, next up on the wish list. One of the things they may rewrite with the new engine is the netcode. Now, I don't know this for sure, but if it happens, please Psyonix, take a look at the kickoffs. The Rocket League netcode works based on prediction. And most predictions on your own car usually work fine, as well as the ball, because they follow simple trajectories and you already know your most recent car's input. The only problem usually with prediction is that you can't really predict what the other players on the field are doing. And that is usually where the discrepancies come in. Now, you can't really fix that perfectly, and I'm not asking Psyonix to do that. I'm asking them to change kickoffs, because currently kickoffs do not get predicted, even though there's a simple timer, 3, 2, 1, go. It is the most obvious and easiest thing to predict when the go moment will happen and basically start the kickoff there. However, the game does not do that, which means by the time the server signal arrives at your PC, you then get teleported forward by the amount that has already happened, since you always have some lag over the internet. This seems completely unnecessary, and the only reason why I can see this still being a thing is because of how the netcode might be written. Now, the netcode might not be active while the game hasn't really started, so then you might not have the prediction because of that, because you're waiting on the kickoff. Therefore, this might require a lot more rewriting than the simple change it appears to be. Another issue with the netcode right now is usually related to flip resets. Now, if you've gone for a lot of flip resets, I'm sure this kind of stuff has happened to you once or twice at least. What is happening here is basically that your client thought you got the flip reset and the server thought, no, you didn't get the flip reset. We're talking about tiny differences here, and usually they're caused by lag, but maybe they're also caused by the physics not being quite deterministic, I'm not sure. Regardless though, if you get the flip reset and then you use it only half a second later, then by that time the server should have long sent a message to your client that you did not actually get the flip reset. Now, the server, however, never actually did that. So if you try to use your flip half a second later, it will actually appear as if it works until the server tells your client, no, you can't actually dodge. So then your client reverts back and it looks really weird, all of that, while that could all have been prevented by the server just telling the client when it gets a flip reset, and when the client didn't actually get the flip reset when it expected one, then it would disable the ability for the player to use their dodge, and you would never have a desync, you would just not be able to use your dodge. These are really the two key issues in netcode that I think they can fix. Other than that, there's of course always experimentation that you can do here or there to improve it, but beyond that, I think every other improvement is really difficult and probably ends up with some trade-offs on another end, where you improve something and then you make something else worse. Okay, more wishes. One thing that I would like to see is to detach all the graphics options that have a gameplay impact from general settings. For example, right now, the graphics actually change how detailed the ball trail is. And this may have some small impact on how easily you can see the spin of the ball, and therefore I think this should be a separate graphic option rather than bundled into one big setting. If a player really needs the performance gain they can get by reducing the trail complexity, then let them turn that off individually. Another one that's slightly less important in my opinion is grass. Now grass is also tied to a group setting, and I think it's better to have that as an individual setting so you can just choose to play with a flat surface rather than having this complex grass where the ground is not just a flat plane. While I'm at it with the graphical settings, shadows are one thing that I would like to see slightly improved, because right now shadows actually disappear at a distance, which is usually done to improve performance, but since in Rocket League you only have a couple of cars and the ball, which are always the same amount of cars and ball in the arena, it should be possible to render the shadows of those 7 objects all the time and have cars in the distance with the shadow. This can improve the spatial perception of where the car actually is, how close it is to the ground when it's landing, and this in my opinion is definitely a benefit for a game like Rocket League. Another thing that I kind of already mentioned for the update is the UI. Please Psyonix, make a UI that doesn't have terrible performance. Right now when you click menu buttons, they almost always give you a massive FPS drop. Now that is actually the one I care least about. And there are reasons for that, because the UI usually has like a lot of state and data in the background that it all loads, but that can be loaded asynchronously, and a lot of things already get loaded asynchronously in Rocket League. However, the button still always gets a lot of lag. More importantly, in my opinion, is the boost counter. Now, if you're on a low-end PC with a weak processor, the boost counter will actually be a possible limiter of your performance. This is easily tested by disabling the UI with Buckers mod, or using unlimited boost in freeplay, because this bug only happens if you actually use boost. So if you're at 0 boost, or if you have infinite boost, then you won't actually experience this loss in performance. I have no clue what is going on there, and usually on a high-end computer you will not notice, but sometimes it can still limit your performance. Obviously then at a higher level you will drop from, I don't know, 280 to 200 FPS, but it's still something that's completely unnecessary, because a boost counter should really not be eating up any performance at all. An issue that probably affects less people but is significantly more severe is if you try to use a keyboard and a controller, or a controller and a mouse at the same time. Now this sounds like it may be crazy, but some people like to play certain hybrid schemes, and more importantly, there are these new type of analog keyboards which basically detect how far you can press down a key. And the way they send the data to a game is by sending controller inputs to the game. So the game thinks there's a controller connected even though it's actually a keyboard. And then you use that with the mouse at the same time, and your performance absolutely gets crushed. And there's basically nothing you can do except turn off the UI, which, well, that is not really a good option. So I actually reported this roughly 2.5 years ago, and Psyonix hasn't done anything about it. I doubt they really care, but if they're gonna make a UI rewrite, then hopefully at least they care enough to take stuff like this into account and make sure that this issue does not happen. Because I think analog keyboards are only going to become more and more popular, and especially for a game like Rocket League, which is basically the perfect game for such a device. It's a shame that basically you have to trade off the analog advantage versus the performance disadvantage. And right now the performance drop is so bad that I would say if you're already a precise player, you're better off using a non-analog keyboard just because of that. Those were all the points I wanted to cover. Thank you all very much for watching. Let me know in the comments what you think about the Unreal Engine 5 confirmation, what you think about the physics, and whether you think that improvements should be made or whether it should be just left to make sure it's the same as always. I hope some developers from Psyonix watch this video, and maybe they can use the comments as a more wider community feedback. In case you were wondering why I haven't made any real videos recently, it's because I'm heavily working on my thesis and it's taken me a lot more time than I predicted, but I want to make sure that it's good and maybe I can cover it on this channel afterwards. So I guess I can just end it with this. See you hopefully soon for the next video.